Hey, this isn't technically my first video on this channel, but I'm sort of repurposing it into a channel where I just talk about stuff that interests me. There isn't going to be a specific theme. One video could be about gaming, the next about economics, the next about science, whatever really. This is just going to be an outlet for me to share my thoughts on topics that I find interesting, so let's jump in. So the title of this video is a little provocative, and obviously new things are made all the time, but it's a trend I've noticed over the last decade or so that appears especially true in media like games and movies, but also shows up in almost every kind of product out there. So what's the reason behind it? In case you haven't already noticed what I'm talking about yourself, take video games as an example. Sure, there are new and innovative franchises that release from time to big success, and especially indie titles don't fall into this category anywhere near as much. But when you look at AAA game releases over the last decade, there's an obvious trend of companies just releasing new installments in established franchises rather than working on something truly new. This has been going on for longer than just the past decade, of course. I mean, we're on Call of Duty 21 at this point, but I feel like this trend has only gotten more concentrated over the last decade or so. This is true in movies and TV shows as well, where more and more we're seeing franchises like Marvel, Game of Thrones, or The Walking Dead being milked for half a dozen or more spin-off shows and movies, and I think we've all seen at least one TV show where they have a great first season or two but refuse to end on a strong note and just keep producing worse and worse seasons until the show becomes unrecognizable trash by the end of it. Don't get me wrong, as long as the games or shows or movies in question remain good, this isn't necessarily a problem. But a lot of the time it feels like they are just being milked dry and declining in quality over time, but rather than trying something new or launching a new IP, they just release more rehashed trash in the same universe, hoping that the baseline fandom of the thing in question will show up just because it has Call of Duty or The Walking Dead in its title. This trend permeates almost every product type as well, not just media, and it appears to be a wider trend within society in general. One of the most obvious reasons for this is nostalgia. For all of history, people want to remember the good old days. Even if their life is objectively better now than it was then, something in our nature forces us to wear those rose-tinted glasses and remember only the positives and high times of that period in our lives while discarding all the bad times. Don't get me wrong, some things truly were better back then, and with how off the rails the world seems to be going nowadays, you could definitely make that argument. But nostalgia at the very least enhances those effects and is often the sole cause of them. The companies that make these products know this fact and will absolutely nostalgia bait to the high heavens if it'll improve their bottom line. I mean, just look at how many re-releases, reimaginings, and reboots we see nowadays. This also ties into the idea of the monoculture. The basic idea there is that people used to gravitate en masse towards one or a few cultural icons or phenomena of the time. For example, the Pokemon craze or Call of Duty craze when I was a kid. However, with the advent of the internet causing us to connect with more people and things than ever before, this idea of the monoculture has subsided over the last couple of decades, and people are more and more getting into smaller niche things that interest them, rather than a whole herd of consumers jumping on the latest big thing. In some ways, this is a good thing. People can find their true interests and find people who share those interests much more easily. But to get back to the point, this has led to less and less concentration of consumers on any one thing, which leads to less potential revenue for the companies making those things, which in turn makes them riskier. That idea of risks being harder to take is the other major factor in why I think new stuff isn't being made as much anymore. Why risk releasing a new IP that could pop or flop when you could release another Call of Duty game or another Marvel movie or another Universes Beyond Magic set? Which that in itself is another thing that I've seen a lot more of, that being crossovers. Since everyone has their own niche thing nowadays that they really care about and the monoculture is less prevalent, companies can pull you in by appealing to that niche thing that you like by doing a crossover event, where your favorite TV character is now in Fortnite or your favorite anime villain is now a Magic the Gathering card. But back to that idea of risk, it's no secret in many industries that the costs of producing these products have skyrocketed alongside consumers demanding more and more from them. The cost of developing a AAA game nowadays is astronomical compared to 20 years ago. The same is true with movies, and while they might rake in more money due to charging more or adding microtransactions or reaching a larger audience, that increased cost of making these things means that the risk of them failing is even harder to stomach. If you're a $1 billion company and you invest $10 million in a game, it's not world-shaking if that game fails, but if you invest $100 million in that game and it fails, that's a whole different story. Hence why a lot of these companies decide to take the safe route of remaking, rehashing, and sequeling already popular franchises, as they know there will at least be a base of support there that people will buy it due to name recognition. Anthem is a fairly recent huge AAA game flop, and I can't help but think it wouldn't have flopped as spectacularly if it already had some existing name recognition. Obviously, the game or movie or whatever has to be actually good to be successful, but I think people underestimate the staying power of established franchises and the power of nostalgia. Why do you you think we now have 7 Black Ops games instead of something new in the Call of Duty franchise? Because simply calling the game Black Ops instantly boosts its popularity over calling it something else due to people's pre-establishment with the idea of Black Ops games. We can also look at Starfield and how that game flopped, which yes, you can absolutely make the argument that it flopped because it was a bad game, and that is certainly the largest factor, but you'd be crazy to dismiss the fact that it was a brand new IP from Bethesda with no previous attachment from fans, and if it was a Fallout or Elder Scrolls title of the same quality, people would have been inherently more interested and the game would have done better because it's already established in their brains and they have fond memories of playing Fallout 3 and New Vegas, or Oblivion and Skyrim back in the day. We also see this in evergreen games like League of Legends or Fortnite, and how they can hold players over literal decades in some cases as people become extremely attached and invested in those games, which puts further pressure on new releases as there's a ton of people who just play League or just play Fortnite and won't be interested in buying the newest games because all their time and money is being spent on these evergreen titles. I did mention earlier in the video that indie products don't follow this trend anywhere near as much, which I think is further evidence that it's the cost and risk of developing big movies and TV shows nowadays that is the largest factor. Indie games don't take anywhere near as much investment of time, money, and manpower, and thus can take larger risks or try pushing the envelope and create something new. This even extends out to AA games like the recent success of Baldur's Gate 3 and Expedition 33. Yes, BG3 is technically a sequel in an established franchise, but you'd be kidding yourself if you thought that was the main reason behind its success. BG3 is massively different to the first two games, had a gigantic time gap between it and BG2, and was even developed by a completely different studio than the first two games. BG3 is much closer to a brand new thing than it is to a true sequel of BG2. But yeah, you're not crazy. Stuff is being remade, rehashed, and sequeled way more often nowadays, and there is a lack of big new releases. But if you do have a clamoring for something new, indie studios right now are pushing the boundaries far more than big AAA studios are, as they can afford to take more risk and be more agile in how they create their products. What are your thoughts on this topic though? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.